What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. How an English-speaking gay Prussian became an American Revolutionary War hero. In the winter of 1778 at Valley Forge, the Continental Army was the last group in need of an emotional boost. Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben appears here. With his arrival in a horse-drawn, fur-lined sleigh, accompanied by his gay lovers and a pet greyhound, this Prussian drillmaster established himself in the pantheon of stylish revolutionaries. There is evidence that this gay, flamboyant expatriate was a major factor in the colonial effort to reorganize itself into a fighting force that was formidable enough to defeat the British Crown in the American Revolution. Additionally, the history of the American Revolution is full of stories about Baron von Steuben that are similarly bizarre. Although the Baron was not as crazy as Wolfgang Mozart or as crazy as Teddy Roosevelt, he was still a unique historical figure who deserved attention and respect. He was expelled from the Prussian army due to scandalous rumors. Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, then 17 years old, enlisted in the Prussian army in 1746. Von Steuben, who was good at his job and got promoted up the ranks, saw a lot of action in the European 7 Years' War and even ended up on the staff of Frederick the Great. Von Steuben was taken out of the Prussian army after the war was over. Steuben was only in the tiny principality of Hohenzollern-Hachingen for a short time after the war. However, some seriously scandalous rumors about his sex life eventually forced him out of his position. Not only was von Steuben rumored to be a homosexual, but he was also said to particularly enjoy the company of young boys, a rumor that has never been substantiated. Von Steuben went to France in 1775 to look for a military position because of this slanderous and damaging gossip. He got a free ticket to the United States from Benjamin Franklin. The process by which von Steuben obtained a military position with the colonial army was lengthy and winding. The French government did not intend to appoint von Steuben to their own military upon his arrival in France. Rather, they hoped to establish professional organization and discipline in the disorganized Continental Army by lending the colonies money. They introduced von Steuben to Ambassador Benjamin Franklin, but Franklin refused to accept payment for von Steuben's services because he had been instructed by the Continental Congress to reject high-level mercenaries. Franklin and von Steuben, on the other hand, eventually came to a settlement that they could both live with, and von Steuben agreed to report for the simple cost of free passage to America. He showed the American army how to use the latrine. The efforts of von Steuben were not limited to the battlefield. The Continental Army lacked a systematic approach to hygiene and sanitation prior to his arrival. The Prussian drillmaster instituted fundamental changes, placing kitchen and toilet facilities at opposite ends of any encampment, for example. The colonial military had never heard of the latrine before von Steuben, so this new method made camp life much more bearable on a daily basis. The Continental Congress officially appointed von Steuben Inspector General of the Army in May 1778 on George Washington's explicit recommendation for this and other significant changes to military administration. He hosted the first military party in underwear in American history. Baron von Steuben never denied being gay in public. In fact, von Steuben met an officer in the Continental Army on his way to Valley Forge to report to Washington. North quickly joined von Steuben's entourage, sharing a home in Valley Forge with him and eventually becoming his aide-de-camp. North and another young officer, Benjamin Walker, were even adopted by von Steuben, allowing them to live with him without breaking any moral laws. Also, it sounds like the house von Steuben lived in at Valley Forge must have been pretty wild. It is said that he hosted the first party in American military history in underwear. A party was held by the Baron for their lower-ranking friends only. However, he insisted that none should be admitted that had on a whole pair of breeches, making fun of the shortages that affected both enlisted men and junior officers. With style, he burst into Valley Forge. When Baron von Steuben arrived in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, in February 1778, he made one of the grandest and splashiest entrances of his life, and the American troops waiting there had never seen anything quite like it. He basically rode into this military camp in a massive sleigh pulled by black Percheron draft horses. It was a very formal place. He was decked out in silk robes, had a miniature greyhound on his lap, and had a massive retinue of servants and lovers trailing in his wake. Behind the Baron were African servants, a French chef, his French aide-de-camp, Louis de Pontier, and his 17-year-old lover and secretary, Pierre-Étienne du Ponceau. Given that its details were recorded in history, his entrance must have had an impact. The Continental Army was completely transformed by him. How exactly did a non-native English-speaking Prussian officer fundamentally alter the Continental Army? The colonials' enthusiasm in battle had never been a problem, but at crucial points, their discipline and organization would break down completely. Von Steuben first selected a model company of soldiers and instructed them in the proper methods of standing and facing, marching in step, using a bayonet, and reloading a rifle until these methods became so commonplace that they became second nature. Following that, these newly trained soldiers were sent to instruct at the brigade level. The Prussian exercise was well known to entire regiments just a month after von Steuben arrived. George Washington was so impressed that he cancelled all other drills until the entire army adopted von Steuben's strategy. To the troops, he had his profanities translated. Von Steuben required translation in all of his interactions with other military personnel because he did not speak English. This included his personal proclivity for swearing while instructing his troops on his specific tactics. He would have his assistants translate additional swear words for the troops once his limited English vocabulary of swear words was exhausted. Another tactic that eventually made von Steuben popular with his American fighters was his use of this one for comic effect. The book on American military training was literally written by him. Von Steuben was encouraged to write down his ideas for training and drills because they were so successful. Alexander Hamilton and Nathaniel Greene translated this French volume, Regulations for the Order and Discipline of the United States Troops. During the trying times of the Revolution, the manual became known as the Blue Book because it was bound on the only color paper that was available. The book provided a methodical synopsis of tactics, encampments, arms maintenance, artillery, every rank's responsibilities, and even drum commands. Although many of its methods are still used, it was not officially used until 1812. George Washington's last letter written as Commander-in-Chief was to von Steuben. George Washington's last letter written as a soldier in service to the Continental Army was composed on December 23, 1783. It was a letter from Friedrich von Steuben acknowledging his contributions to the new nation. This is the last letter I will ever write while I continue in the service of my country. The hour of my resignation is fixed at 12 this day, after which I will become a private citizen on the banks of the Potomac, where I shall be glad to embrace you. My dear Baron, although I have taken frequent opportunities, both in public and private, to acknowledge your great zeal, attention, and abilities in performing the duties of your office, I wish to make use of this last moment of my public life to signify that he was opulent despite always being broke. The title and status of Baron von Steuben as a member of Prussian nobility were entirely invented by his ancestors. He claimed to be from Prussian aristocracy, but in reality, his family was very poor. Von Steuben was typically impoverished during the war due to his lifestyle, his acquisition of ornate uniforms that he designed himself, and Congress's delay in providing him with meaningful compensation. Congress either did not pay any promissory notes after the Revolution or did so as long as possible. Von Steuben was very open about his problems with money, and because of his connections with politicians, he got a 40-acre estate in New Jersey, a big piece of land in Oneida County, New York, and a big federal pension of $2,400 a year. Nevertheless, von Steuben died in a log cabin on his mostly undeveloped property, spending his final years in relative poverty. William North and Benjamin Walker, his lifelong companions, received any assets he left behind despite his debt. His Special Forces unit is still in existence today. Quite a few of von Steuben's ideas, policies, and practices have actually lasted. Von Steuben selected 100 men to become experts in the fundamentals of soldiering when he began his methodical process of disciplining the Continental Army. It is still in existence because of the success of this special unit. One of von Steuben's living legacies is this unit, which is known as the President's 100. During the desolate, bone-chilling winter of 1778 at Valley Forge, the Continental Army was the most in need of a drastic overhaul, military, hygienic, and emotional ever. Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben was a flamboyant, German-speaking, fur-clad, possibly aristocratic Prussian military officer who arrived in a sleigh pulled by black Percheron horses, accompanied by his faithful greyhound, his lovers, and a full entourage that rivaled Marie Antoinette's glam squad. He arrived without formal credentials or congressional approval. One of the most astonishing and oddly touching transformations in American military history followed. In the snow, the man who helped transform the disheveled colonial mob into a legitimate fighting force barely spoke English. The equivalent of putting a military RuPaul into the middle of a Revolutionary War zone was his presence at Valley Forge, complete with satin, sarcasm, and a propensity for throwing parties in underwear. But underneath the show was a tactical genius who changed everything for George Washington's ragtag army. Not with gunpowder, but with discipline, logic, sanitation, and soul. Not with gunpowder. The path von Steuben took to become an American icon was not an easy one. Friedrich Wilhelm Ludolf Gerhard Augustin von Steuben, who was born in Magdeburg, Prussia, in 1730, had a respectable military background. At the age of 17, he joined the elite Prussian army, rising through the ranks throughout the bloody 7 Years' War. He even served on Frederick the Great's personal staff at one point, one of the most feared and effective military monarchs of the time. Prussia, on the other hand, proved to be his undoing. He served briefly for the Hohenzollern-Hechingen Principality following the war, but rumors stalled his career. Not just any scandalous conversation. Von Steuben was said to be homosexual and, even worse in the eyes of the 18th century, to be fond of young boys, a claim that historians dispute and do not support. These rumors effectively destroyed his reputation within the military circles of Europe, regardless of whether they were true. Now radioactive, a promising officer, von Steuben fled to France in 1775, desperate for a second chance and possibly redemption on a continent that was more forgiving, despite being shunned by the military aristocracy and unable to find a job that paid well. Benjamin Franklin was the direct result of fate's intervention in France. The Continental Congress had instructed Franklin to reject the numerous foreign mercenaries hoping to make a name for themselves during the American Revolution. The majority were more concerned with titles and gold than with liberty or freedom. Von Steuben appeared to be the same at first. But Franklin, who is always a good character assessor, noticed something in the disgraced Prussian. Franklin arranged for von Steuben to travel to the colonies armed with exaggerated letters of recommendation claiming he was a general in the Prussian army and a former aide-de-camp to Frederick the Great. With no money to offer and only passage to America as compensation, von Steuben traveled to the colonies. Technically incorrect, but just true enough to give the impression that he is essential. One of the most unlikely successes in U.S. military history was initiated by this diplomatic resume padding key that granted von Steuben access to the revolution. Von Steuben gave the Americans something they hadn't known they needed: a systematizer as well as a strategist. Von Steuben found soldiers in rags, without boots, freezing to death, demoralized, and lacking even the most fundamental training when he arrived at Valley Forge in February 1778. Many were unable to properly load or aim their muskets. There was no sense of unity, hygiene guidelines, or drills. Unsurprisingly, there was a lot of disease because soldiers cooked and relieved themselves near their latrines and tents. The Prussian officer was shocked by the disorder. However, rather than condemning the Americans, he got to work by rolling up his elaborate sleeves. He also taught, corrected, coached, and inspired in addition to giving orders. His first significant advance in the military. Latrines. That is correct. The American military was introduced to basic sanitation by Friedrich von Steuben. He insisted on daily hygiene practices and designated distinct, far from one another locations for the kitchen and toilet. It was the beginning of American military camp protocol. Dirt had to be fought before tactics could be taught. Von Steuben was brilliant because he could see the big picture and then get down to the details. Because he was unable to communicate effectively in English, he initially gave orders in French, with an aide-de-camp translating. During drills, when he ran out of English curse words, he demanded that his assistants teach him new ones right away so he could better spit out the soldiers in their native tongue. He did this not out of malice but out of charm and humor to make himself popular with the troops. He'd scream, "Goddamn! Why don't you talk to me, damn you?" in shaky English, which simultaneously frightened and amused the men. But von Steuben was more than just a showman. He also set up a model company of 100 soldiers and taught them the fundamentals of the military, like how to move a rifle, use a bayonet and form a line. These men spread his message of precision throughout the continental ranks and became his discipline apostles. And it worked wonderfully. The entire army underwent transformation within weeks. Washington was so impressed that he ordered the universal adoption of von Steuben's methods and cancelled all previous training protocols. The United States had been basically reorganized by the man who spoke no English. Army with French, Prussian, and mime precision. The issue of his personality then came up. Let's be clear. Von Steuben was a fantastic addition. It was pure stagecraft for him to arrive at Valley Forge. With a miniature greyhound perched on his lap like a Bond villain and riding in a sleigh like a Baroque Santa Claus. He was followed by African servants, a French cook, and at least one adolescent lover. Louis de Pontier, his glamorous assistant, and Pierre-Étienne du Ponceau, his 17-year-old secretary and rumored lover, were also in his entourage. William North and Benjamin Walker, two young officers, later became his closest friends. He eventually adopted both men, a legal ploy that allowed them to live together and inherit his estate in defiance of anti-sodomy laws and social norms. Whether you referred to them as adopted sons, lovers, or life partners, their emotional connection was undeniable. He made no effort to appear heterosexual and hosted what is now referred to as the first underwear party in American military history, although his relationships were not secret. Von Steuben ordered that none should be admitted that had on a whole pair of breeches, at one particularly cheeky event, and only invited lower-ranking officers. It had elements of revolutionary chic, morale-boosting ritual, and bonding ritual. Von Steuben had substance, despite his showmanship. He codified existing systems as well as invented new ones. His French military manual, translated by Alexander Hamilton and Nathaniel Greene, became the Continental Army's official rulebook. It was originally called Regulations for the Order and Discipline of the Troops of the United States. Because of the distinctive paper used in its binding, it came to be known as the Blue Book. Everything from camp placement to drill commands, weapon maintenance to officer responsibilities, was laid out in the Blue Book. Until 1812, it served as the official training manual, influencing military procedure for decades. The flamboyant foreigner without a formal command had literally written the book on American military discipline. Von Steuben was the one who had written the book. Even after the war was over, some recognition was given to his contribution. Von Steuben was consistently underpaid and ignored by Congress, despite his role in the survival and eventual success of the Continental Army. He did not come from a wealthy family, and his extravagant tastes frequently exceeded his means. Before receiving a modest pension and land grants in New Jersey and upstate New York, he had to petition the government for years. He ended up living modestly in a log cabin, surrounded by his chosen family, broke but still fantastic. He left North and Walker his estate and possessions when he died in 1794, indicating where he had always been loyal and affectionate. However, von Steuben's legacy has never truly vanished. The 100 soldiers he personally trained became the foundation of the military unit that is still in existence today, and is referred to as the President's 100. His emphasis on hygiene, order, drill precision, and officer-soldier respect for one another are still fundamental components of American military training. Additionally, his impact went far beyond tactics. He demonstrated that flamboyant leadership is possible, that patriotism and queerness are not mutually exclusive, and that eccentricity frequently conceals effectiveness. George Washington was sure to know. On December 23, 1783, the day he resigned as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, he wrote to von Steuben his final letter. In it, Washington acknowledged not only a friend but also the creator of an army that had just established a nation, expressing, "My entire approbation of your conduct." Von Steuben started a new career at a time when being gay could kill it. He was a silk-robed mystery in a revolution that was led by diplomats with powdered hair and rough-edged patriots. Von Steuben remains one of the most significant, flamboyant, and underappreciated founding fathers America has ever had, and the country still struggles with how to give LGBTQ+ figures in its past due credit. Even though he didn't fight at Bunker Hill or cross the Delaware, it's possible that Washington's ragtag revolution would have died in the snow at Valley Forge without him. Instead, they became an army thanks to a gay Prussian who didn't speak English. A wonderful one at that.